There we go. And I'll introduce myself here in a minute. And to start, though, I'd love to pass to Lauren Kugler, who's the director of the Community Foundation. Lauren.
Scott, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. And it's good to see so many familiar names and some familiar faces on the screen. Scott and I talked a little bit about what we've seen in community grants over the years, and he asked me to just share a little bit of the transitions through the years. And it was interesting looking back in our files. The grant making has happened from before there was one community foundation, when there were two in the early 2000s. And in 2008, the first year that it was one community foundation doing community grants, I came across, in looking into this a little bit, the priorities and the things that that year's grant committee were asked to consider and think about. And that was requiring seed money for innovative projects, addressing new and emerging needs, or approaching existing needs more effectively, assisting those whose needs are not being met adequately by existing resources, building on strengths and assets of people in the community to engage them in problem solving, promoting collaboration among community groups, focusing on the cause rather than the cure, and leveraging additional public and private resources, both financially and volunteer, and building a nonprofit's capacity to meet community needs more effectively. So a lot of the themes, even from 2008, certainly ring true today. And I would say, in looking at the scoring criteria from 2008, we had a long way to go on our end and are constantly learning to make sure that the scoring reflects what we're asking for. And in the last couple of years, you've seen a lot of transparency and sharing all that information. And that's an effort to make sure those are well aligned, so that whatever we're asking for, you also know how that's being evaluated. So in 2008, $95,000 was requested from 32 organizations, and 56,000 total was awarded to 28 of those organizations. Last year, we had $276,000 requested from 37 organizations, and 175,000 was awarded to, it was requested from 49 organizations. 175,000 was awarded to 37 organizations. You might remember, if you were with your current organization or another in the community in 2020, we threw everything out the window that year with community grants and simplified as much as we could. We awarded $125,000 that year, and we learned a lot. And some of what we learned is we simplified too much. It was a great thing for that moment in time when everyone had so much going on in the world around them. But because we simplified so much, the reviewers didn't always have enough information, and they had a lot of questions. That was a great opportunity for us to learn what did we need to add back in, and what was great that we'd left behind. And that led us to really leaning into general operating support, less emphasis on project support, and then started the ball rolling for adding collaborations as a category in our grant making the following year. A couple other tidbits from the history, and then I'll let you get going, are a few of you were probably around, and I started with the Community Foundation in 2013. And at that time, we were accepting paper grant applications. You were required to submit 12 copies of everything in your grant application, except for your balance sheet and P&L, and we only wanted one copy of those. So not only was it a pain on your end, but you can imagine that staff spent, I think, at least a week compiling binders for reviewers. And in reflecting on that, we switched to electronic in 2014. I reminded myself to be open-minded to artificial intelligence, because as many of you are probably toying with, there are positives and negatives that come along with technology all the time. And to me, that moving from hard copy grants to electronic was such a significant shift in saving everyone time and energy, and paper. And I think it would behoove us to keep that in mind as we move into new and adapting technologies, as time goes on. And then the other piece that has been very valuable for us is grant feedback. In 2015, when Mario Ewell, who's on the call today, joined us at CFGV, she started doing one-on-one grant feedback with grant applicants, which Scott has carried on since Mario retired. And I hope that you find that valuable. I hope that no matter if you're funded this year or not, if you apply, I hope you take advantage of that. It's a great opportunity to get insight into the review committee's thinking, to see your grant application through fresh eyes. And we always get insight on how we can improve our process from your feedback. And that's incredibly valuable, for us to improve, or maybe we have a blind spot we've missed. So I highly encourage you to take part in that. And again, I want to thank you so much for taking time today. And we're always available for questions. So I'll hand it back over to you, Scott.
Cool. Thanks, Lauren. And as we, Lauren mentioned, continuing to evolve and adapt and learn in our processes, glad that you're here today to join, to hear a little bit about what 2024 community grants will look like. For those of you that have experience with this in the past, there aren't a ton of changes. There are a few that I'm going to highlight. And based on the registration form, it looks like a pretty healthy mix of like half and half. Folks who have never submitted a grant to us and about half who have experience. So that's great. So I'm going to try to hit on all of the basics. I'm probably not going to be able to manage to monitor the chat while I go through, but I will pause for any questions. And of course, if you have any, feel free to throw them in the chat and we can get to them at the end. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So Laura mentioned a little bit of a snapshot into, well, past grants history, but also 2023. So a little bit deeper into that, we got 49 applications. 37 of those were awarded for a total of 175,000. That breakdown was 28 general operating support grants, 7 project grants, and 2 collaboration grants. On that note, grant reports are due on April 30th for 2023 grants. Those can be found in the same application that you filled out the application in SM Apply. It'll take you right to the grant report. And as long as we have those by April 30th, that's the deadline there before the May 15th deadline on the new application. And quick note on that, I think we have a couple of multi-year grantees on the call. For you all, there's a little bit more work to be done, but within the next day or two, those reports will be ready and I'll communicate with you individually on how to fill those out. 2024, the categories that I just want to briefly go into, they're starting to expand a little bit. And, as we continue to listen and hear feedback and try to find different fits for different grants, here's what we're currently operating with. So as you can see from last year, the majority of our granting to nonprofits goes to general operating support, but that makes up the majority of our granting in total. Of that, there are single year and multi-year applicants. Right now, the multi-year applicants are by invite only, and that is a program that is just 2 years into its pilot. The board discussions recently have been very positive around multi-year grants, and they were made into a permanent program for us, which we're very excited about. So we are continuing to grow multi-year grants and get to a place to where it can just be embedded in our processes. Currently for this year, it is by invitation only. And then the other big category being project support, that is open to both single applicants that we'll get into a little bit later, as well as collaborations, which Lauren mentioned briefly that we're really excited about and wanting to lean into more moving forward. And then, you know, below that photo, those are just the all the different categories for our general operating support grants. And within the application, you'll have to select which of those categories you believe your organization fits into best. So a few things to get started, and where I wanted to point you to at the outset here was our grants page on our website. So other than in this recording will go up here on this page as well, but there are a lot of different resources we have up here that I think will be helpful as you go, and I'll reference a few of those today. We have guidelines for single and multi-year grantees, scoring criteria, eligibility, and docking. But also this year we added a few more things. This one is a holdover. It's instructions on just setting up the SM Apply account, which is where all organizations are filled out online. I'm not going to go into that. That's all pretty self-explanatory. But on other resources and templates we have, like I said, I'll be mentioning, but we go into certificates of good registration and good standing, how to locate those, where they are, as well as sample certificates from the Community Foundation, just so you can see what we're looking for, exactly what we're requesting, and hoping that you upload. And then also this document, understanding internal controls for financial policies, that will be helpful for a fiscal policy document. That is a required upload that I'll touch on a little bit later. But in general, I would just encourage you, you know, pin this as a page, as a resource to come back to as you go in your application, as there are a few things that will be helpful in that regard. So a couple of things just off the top, you'll notice here in the upper right-hand corner, when you get to SM Apply and you're starting to fill out your application, this is one of the first things that's going to pop up in the Get Started section. And it's arguably one of the most important questions just based on our processes. It asks you to select what best describes you as an applicant. And then all the choices are aligned with what is eligible in our process. So just encourage you to read this carefully. Note that collaborations are at the bottom. Oftentimes that can kind of go overlooked, and that can throw a wrench into how your application actually populates and what you're answering. So just note that that's, you know, what you select is really important here in the Get Started. And then another SM Apply specific reminder. As I mentioned, you'll find this document that if you haven't created an account, will take you through how to do that. It's pretty simple. The one thing that consistently tends to trip folks up when you're navigating in SM Apply, you have two different accounts, essentially. You have your personal account and you have an organization account. Through your personal account, it can get you kind of everywhere on the site, but the way that the platform works, only organizations can apply themselves. So if you're just navigating as you and you go to the 2024 application, you're not going to find the green button that says start until you're actually on your organization. So in the bottom right here, that's where what that toggle looks like. Disregard Scott's tots. I make up fake organizations to do testing, and that's a Michael Scott from The Office thing. But anyway, when you see your name in the upper left-hand corner and you can toggle down, just make sure you're navigating as your organization in order to be able to access all the applications. All right, getting into eligibility, and I'll pause after this slide in case there are any questions that have come up so far. As I mentioned, all nonprofits, regardless of where you're based, will apply for general operating support only. General operating support not necessarily mean administration. It really means simply requesting a flat amount of money that can be spent wherever you choose. So that's all nonprofits. All government applicants, that includes Western, Gunnison County, the school district, all apply for project support. Within this, that is for something that enhances what you're currently doing in plans for 2024 and does not replace what you anticipate already getting. So it's budget enhancing support, project support, instead of budget replacing. And then finally, faith-based groups apply for project support. Collaborations apply for project support. And on the collaboration notes, we just ask that the lead applicant be a 501c3 or a government entity. And so I'll pause there. On the right-hand side, that's just a screenshot of the first part of the application. After you get started online, you'll see, you know, the pretty generic organization info, etc. But keeping in mind kind of what kind of group you are and where you fit into our granting processes will be pretty important at the outset of these applications. And on that note, just wanted to mention that we request that all new applicants, if you've never filled out a community grant before, all faith-based applicants and all collaboration applicants, just call and check in with us first before you submit your application. Mostly you'll probably end up chatting with me, and we just want to make sure everybody's best set up for success, understands where they fit into these processes, where eligibility is, and kind of set you on the right track. So if you are a faith-based applicant that's never applied before, give us a shout. We'll talk you through some things, and same with first-time applicants and any collaborations. Anybody have anything they want to hop in with at this point, question-wise or anything? All right. Feel free to interrupt me if anything comes up. So something else to point out here within the actual application online that is going to be very important is where this red arrow is. So again, this is very close to the beginning of your application, similar to what best describes you as an applicant. Here we ask you what sort of grant you are requesting. And so here, you know, we have everything basically that I just explained right above this question, directing where everybody will apply. But based on what you select in these bubbles, it will populate the application differently. So really just ensure, you know, for 501c3s, it's pretty easy. It's general operating. If you are a 501c3, and I'll get to this a little bit later too, and you are coming in with a collaboration application, we really need you to select collaboration, even though you are a 501c3. And nonprofits are eligible for both. So I'll explain that a little bit more as we go, but just note that this grant request type question is pretty important as far as the information that we are gathering to send to our review committee. And there have been a couple of instances within the last couple of years when folks have come in with a really strong application and unfortunately checked the wrong box here and checked the wrong bubble. And so even though the strength of the application was felt, the way that the rest of the platform populated it, we didn't get the exact right information that we needed for the review committee. So just to ensure your application's best set up for success, really pay attention to that. A couple other notes here. So requesting general operating support, you're just going to tell us the total, your total amount request, which can't be more than half of your current year budget. And then if you're a public entity and you're requesting project support, you're just going to identify how much the project costs. And this is a slight change this year to our processes. we strongly suggest, strongly encourage that the amount for a project request is not more than half of the cash cost of the project. In previous years, that's been mandatory, that it cannot exceed half the cash cost. We are slightly adapting that this year to say is strongly suggested it is something reviewers will be looking for, but it is not technically part of our eligibility when it comes to project grants this year. We're going to move into a few more specifics within the application, both within the narrative and the financials and upload sections. And within the narrative, it's similar to previous years, but there are a couple of differences. So on the left, you'll see the questions for general operating, and on the right, you'll see how it populates for project. To begin, it's pretty simple: mission statement, purpose statement of the group. The next two questions is where I really want to focus. And it's kind of similar to what we've intended in the past, but wanted to rework the questions a little bit to try to get to the explanations and narratives that we were looking for and reviewers were trying to piece together. And so starting out here in the general operating narrative, we want you to explain who your organization serves, why your work is significant, and how it addresses critical issues or needs in the Gunnison Valley. So here we really need the issue that your application is zooming in on. What's the issue? What's the need that you're pointing to? Who it's serving in the community and why it's significant. I took some journalism classes, and I mean, y'all are probably familiar with the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, what, why, and sometimes how. So in this kind of sense, I think about it in really what we're doing here in these first two questions is we're separating the what. We're taking the what out pretty intentionally, and we're putting it as its separate question in number 2. So in number 1, like I said, it's why it matters, it's what the issue is, and it's who. But in the second question, here is where we want to understand, what do you as an organization do? What are your activities? What are you doing programmatically to go back to your the first answer, which is explaining why it's significant? So the way that it's worded is really trying to get you to separate the why and the issue with what you're doing to impact it. And really that's a result of seeing a lot of times applicants kind of really skip over the issue and the why, and like the, you know, kind of the imports around what you're why this is a critical need in the community, and instead just go right into the group's activities. But we really need it to be framed first with the appropriate context of that why. So that's why those are kind of sectioned out like that. And then the next two on the general operating side are, you know, in lines with how you are assessing your programs and your activities. So we ask you to describe the methods and metrics your organization uses to assess and determine its impact. How do you measure in general? How do you measure your effectiveness? So that's more of the general question. And then lastly, we want you to dive into some specifics here, illustrating the difference you've made. So it's kind of in that assessment section, it's kind of more macro in how do you think about that? How do you determine the impact of your organization? And then zooming in a little bit more, provide us some specific examples of that impact and some data that can go along with that. And then hopping over quickly to the narrative, the project side on the narrative piece. It's very similar. I'm not going to go too deeply into it, but again, it's who your group serves, why the work is significant, and what critical needs or issues it's addressing. We ask you to describe your project, and then there are those 2 assessment questions. What do you want to achieve? What change do you want to make? And what method will you use to learn whether you're achieving your goals? Last piece on the narrative. In this particular question, this is the final question, and this goes to both general operating and project applicants. So everybody will be answering this. In previous years, we've we've been really wanting to utilize this question to see how organizations are working together, moving from coordinating to collaborating, and just how they exist in that world. And we also asked about overarching issues that they're wanting to address for the Gunnison Valley. And so you may be familiar with this in the end of last year. The One Valley Resiliency Roadmap final plan was released by the OVLC. And it is a long document, very in-depth, very detailed, and one of its particular one of its 3 sections of goals was focused around civic capacity. And for us at the Community Foundation, that civic capacity piece is a really natural arena for us to fit and for us to work. And we really want to help uplift that as a valley-wide goal moving forward. And so this question it lays out the 3 goals aimed to strengthen civic capacity in the valley, being enabling effective and inclusive community engagement, enhancing coordination and collaboration, and expanding and strengthening community leadership. We want you to identify in what ways your organization is committed to one or more of these and how you are promoting civic capacity within your work. I wanted to pull this out specifically and touch on it for a minute, mostly to say that if you go online and you Google the One Valley Resiliency Roadmap and find the entire document, that's awesome, because there is a lot of good detail in it. It's also, 200 pages, I think it's about 200 pages, and not something in which we are expecting you to certainly not be an expert in, and really familiarize yourself with it as much as you'd like to. I pulled out these 3 goals really so you didn't have to go back into the entirety of that document and parse through kind of the nuances of what it is they're kind of describing there. Instead, we're really focused on these 3 goals right here. Going into the details from that document, we're not super concerned with. And honestly, our committee review members, although they'll be, familiar with the One Valley Resiliency Roadmap and understanding the points of the question, they're not going to be fully diving into that particular document. So all that to say is, I think for you answering this question, everything you need is right there in that narrative piece. If you want to supplement that with the actual OVRR document, that's great, but it is not an expectation, and the committee review members will not be scoring this based on that preconception, if that makes sense. All right. I don't think there are any questions yet that I see in the chat. Come back to any of this if necessary, but right now I'll just keep moving forward from narrative into financials. So again, on the left, you'll see a screenshot from the financial section of our application. This piece of the financials that you see right here is specific to general operating support grants. The projects piece will look a little bit different and be a little bit less. I'll explain that here in a minute, but that's what that screenshot is. In general, we don't expect to award more than $7,000 to any application, including collaboration applications. In the past, folks have sometimes come in with requests of, $8,000, $9,000 or $10,000, hoping that then they might get that $7,000 award. I would suggest not doing that and not requesting more than the max amount, as it hasn't really been a very successful strategy in the past. As I mentioned, for projects for support, it's really strongly encouraged that no more than 50% of the CAS budget can be requested. And then this last note, we ask you, and I'll touch on this more in here in a second, but we ask you to upload a fiscal policy document as part of your application in your financials. That's been approved by your board. And part of our scoring of applications in general is based on management of the organization. And we found that the fiscal policy documents are, you know, a really good gateway into seeing what that looks like. Things like procedures for handling money, separation of duties, you know, fiduciary stewards on your board, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a couple of things to help out with that. One, this understanding internal controls for financial policies. That was one of the links I pointed to on our grants page on our website. It's a pretty beefy document. Both that and there's a template for a fiscal policy document. Both of those are up there. And I would say both of those go to the extreme of like, probably nobody has this much and it might be a little bit overkill, but it's kind of the extent of what is possible. So I would encourage you, if your organization or your group doesn't have a fiscal policy document whatsoever, use those as a starting place. And to see, you know, different examples of what can be included, what should be included. And all of those are on the website, but that is an important piece that our committee review members look at to understand just your policies of governance and oversight within the organization. And so that'll be part of the required uploads, kind of fitting into a bit of a financial piece. And then within the financial part of the application, just a couple of other quick things I wanted to point out. One, this example on the left is from the application, and it's an optional question. And it's essentially, you know, if anything within the financial uploads that you have provided would cause reviewers to have questions or things maybe don't align, we want you to have the opportunity to explain that here for whatever conditions might come up or instances that might come into play as to why the narrative might not line up with the budget to actual or whatever the discrepancy is. I'd encourage you to use that optional question if you need it or if you think it would be useful for our reviewers, as that's come into play and being quite helpful with past applicants in certain circumstances. We ask how many months of operating reserves you have, and we ask in the last 3 years if your organization has had an audit or financial review conducted by an outside party. So on that note, with the audit or financial review, we recognize that both of those are pretty expensive. And for many organizations, doing that even every few years is a pretty big lift, especially audits. A financial review conducted by an outside party also can be expensive, is a little less cumbersome, and is a little less pricey as an audit can be, but is still, you know, certainly something that we are mindful of. Folks who have independent contractors who are kind of handling some books, we don't really take that into consideration as being an outside party since they are still contracting with you. So all that to say is it's something that we are interested in knowing about organizations, and something we consider to be a best practice to do as often as possible. And having said that, we know it's not possible for everybody to do every year, every few years. And so if you haven't had an audit or financial review conducted, in no way does that mean you're not eligible or your application will not be funded just because of that. I bring it up to say that all of these things kind of come together to form a bigger picture as to the financial health and management of this organization. And so, one, as much as you can explain in the optional places provided to give that context and an explanation when necessary, that's great. And two, you know, I wouldn't be super concerned if there's one piece of this financial assessment that we're asking you to fill out, like the audit or financial review. If that's one piece that maybe you don't feel great about, it is just one piece of the bigger financial picture. And so, you know, please reach out and we can chat through if you do have specific concerns about that. But I just wanted to address that quickly here. And then lastly, as far as the application components, we're now to the required uploads. And that's going to be the very last piece of your application. After the narrative, the narrative and the financial pieces, will come all these uploads. And so on this particular page, starting on the right with the 501c3 nonprofits, this is similar to what we've asked for in the past, with one pretty notable distinction, and I've highlighted it. So for 501c3s, we ask for the budget to actual for the most recently completed fiscal year, as well as the balance sheet for the most recently completed fiscal year, which is the same as what we've done in the past. This year, we're asking for a current fiscal year operating budget as approved by your board. And that's opposed to in the past, we've asked for budget to actuals and balance sheets, both for the current fiscal operating year. And so essentially the change here for 501c3s is we're no longer asking for the current year budget to actual and balance sheet. Instead, we're just looking for the current operating budget for the fiscal year. Along with that, the financial policies and fiscal documents that I have touched on a couple of times, certificate of good standing and certificate of registration from the Colorado Secretary of State. Again, there's that resource page on our webpage about that. And then 2 additional uploads of your choice. Pausing real quick to note the 2 additional uploads of your choice. Those are included in every application. So collaborations, projects, fiscal sponsorships, and general operating support all are encouraged to upload 2 additional items. It really can be anything, from videos to news clippings to, testimonials, things like that. We really want to hear stories from that for sure. And we really, it's a really good opportunity to allow committee review members to be exposed to something that maybe they didn't see in the narrative, which can oftentimes bring a lot of power to your application. And as we're moving forward, we're really trying to get those uploads front and center in front of committee review members, and almost direct them to it, off the bat, and then they get into the narrative and financials. But so they're not really like afterthoughts when it comes to our review committee. They are really important possibilities that you can supplement into your application. And I've encouraged folks in the past to go through your narrative and maybe pinpoint a question or 2 that you think, man, their word count is just not enough to describe all I want to describe here. I would then utilize one of your 2 additional uploads to either one, upload, say, a video or press something from the Gunnison Country Times that can speak directly to what you weren't able to do in the narrative, or really just like add in another document that is just continuing the narrative from that question. So I think it's better off to upload a piece of collateral that's not just more typed narrative, but just to say, with those 2 additional uploads, using them strategically and fitting them into the rest of your application narrative can only help you. And regardless, the additional uploads are oftentimes the highlights for committee review members anyway. So just a note on that. So that's 501c3s on the right. On the left, our collaborations and project applications from government agencies and faith-based groups. So they're a little bit less on the required upload side of things. For government agencies and faith-based groups, we ask for a complete project budget, those 2 additional uploads, and then a letter of support from, for example, one of those folks listed. For the complete project budget for those applications, we don't require or really utilize a standard template for project budgets. However, having said that, if that is something that either you'd really like to have or need, or just want to have a discussion about what that budget kind of should look like, please reach out, because we can chat about that one-on-one. And we do have some templates and resources that we have just on file that we can send you if you're interested. So keep that in mind. And then finally, on the collaboration note, again, we asked for the complete project budget, and just want to throw in there that the grant can be divided between multiple partners if it's requested in the application, and we just need that lead applicant to be the 501c3 or government entity. And within those uploads too, for each nonprofit that's involved in the collaboration, we ask for a certificate of good standing and registration. If you're collaborating on an application and you're a nonprofit and your partners are either a government entity or an LLC or something like that, obviously we don't need those from those entities and they wouldn't be able to get them. So it's really just only the nonprofit partners within collaborations that we need those documents from. And while I'm on that note, with 501c3s and collaborations, I mentioned earlier, all nonprofits are eligible to submit their general operating support request as well as a collaboration application. And those are regarded as two separate applications, scored separately, assessed and awarded separately. So keep that in mind, as we've highlighted a few times that collaboration projects are something that are super exciting and we really want to uplift and keep going. For nonprofits, it's really intended to be something that can only be achieved by the collaborative parties, and not something that could be achieved by one of the parties that are coming in alone. So we want to see that the impact is intentional and can really only be achieved by this collaboration. But I also wanted you all to know that as a 501c3, you can put in a general operating support request and separately put in a collaboration request with another entity. We're going to get into review criteria in a second. Was there any questions that have come up for folks in financials or narrative pieces before we move into that?
Hey, Scott, Michelle Truly here. I just put a
Yes.
question in chat. I don't know if you want to address that now or after. Either would be great.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. Okay. And that's the One Valley Resiliency Roadmap question. Great question, Michelle. And we will circle back to that in just a couple of minutes after this review criteria piece. So I'll make sure to get back to that. Thank you.
Thanks.
So last piece here being our review criteria and process. So once after our application closes on May 15th, all applications go into internal staff review. And all of us here at CFGB read the applications to ensure eligibility. That's really essentially, and to learn about all the things, obviously. But before all applications go to the review committee, we ensure that they're eligible with standing with the IRS, all these different required uploads and pieces that I've walked you through, to ensure that they can get to that point. If you are eligible and have happened to submit something incorrectly, or certificate of good standing or registration is out of date, things like that, you may be docked points on your application before it's sent to the review committee. And those are all very specific instances in which that would happen. And those are laid out on the eligibility and docking document on our website. The bulk of the application review happens with the review committee. And these committee members, typically made up of a nine-person team, review the proposal. Like I said, additional uploads, supplementary items as well. We try to direct them pretty intentionally to those. They'll also have access to grant reports for those who received funding in 2023, and they can use any of this information to help decide how they're going to award points. And then the way that each application is scored individually is laid out here in this section here, 1 to 4, for a total of 35 points. 10 of those will be scored on the clarity of the population served, the need, and why it matters. Kind of really in line with that first narrative question right there. Number 2, clarity about your activities. That's up to 10 points. Specifics into general operating and project there. The third is the viability in the upcoming year for 10 points. And then lastly, the commitment to promoting OVRR civic capacity goals related to strengthening the Gunnison Valley. So hopefully, you can draw some through lines between narrative questions, financial pieces and uploads, and how we're scoring individual applications built right into these scoring criteria and rubric. So after each application is scored individually, the scores are aggregated and then the applications are ranked on a committee review day while we're all in the room together. And so essentially the committee then moves that process along by looking to see if there's a clear cutoff of the proposals, that were really clearly not as competitive as the rest. And as that decision is made, there is a cutoff line to award certain organizations funds, and then the committee ranks based on discussion that they have in the room that day. And then this is just the final slide here. So I'm gonna exit out of this and still share part of the screen, but get to Michelle's question as well. So the application deadline is the 15th of May. We have our Here for Good celebration this summer. It's going to be either July 12th or the 19th in Crested Butte. We'll have much more info for you once we confirm that. And the committee review decisions are sent to our board for their June board meeting to approve. So that's kind of the timeline. And I want to circle back to Michelle's question. 3 civic capacity goals. How much should we try to address how we meet the specific strategies and metrics of success that are outlined in the plan, which are very specific? Great question, Michelle. They are very specific, the way that the strategies and metrics of success are measured. And I wouldn't try to adapt too much based on those in themselves. What committee review members are going to be looking for more than anything, as this question was born kind of out of collaboration in general. Anytime that you can speak to the way that you collaborate with others in your sector and across sectors, especially in a question like this, I would dedicate some time to that. What used to just be focused on collaboration alone in previous iterations of this question is now kind of grown from this roadmap plan to not only be coordination and collaboration specific, but include things like enabling effective and inclusive community engagement and expanding and strengthening community leadership. So, like I said, the collaboration one is going to be important kind of always. But we wanted to widen that umbrella to things like community leadership and engagement as well. As far as your specific plan, I would stray away from spending more time than necessary in the actual OVRR plan, and know that the metrics of success that they lay out, as well as the specific strategies, we support as the community foundation, and is kind of the basis of this question. But it's not, those strategies and metrics of success are not going to be front of mind for our committee review members in the way that they're scoring your response. And so I would encourage, just as much as you can take those 3 particular goals, create essentially metrics of success for your own, what that looks like for your specific organization, and display that to the review committee. And as far as if they align with the metrics of success that the actual document has laid out, I wouldn't be too concerned about that. So hopefully, Michelle, that gets to the question. Okay, good.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, totally. All right. Any other questions, concerns, anything pop up as I went through that presentation?
Hey, Scott, it's Mary Beth Kelly. So as a relatively brand new nonprofit with a very specific goal in mind, when does the money, I'm sorry, first time through all this, but the grant deadline's May 15th. When does the money get awarded?
Great question. I think I exited out of that last slide a little too quick, probably, but the checks are cut after our June board meeting, which is typically that first week of July. We have the Here for Good celebration in mid-July, and that is where the awards are announced and presented in person, which we'll continue to do. But I was talking to Alicia, who's our director of operations, the other day, and it sounds like all checks this year will be digital, as far as I know, and it will be early July in which awards are actually provided.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Anything else? Just to throw this out there, I appreciate one-on-one meetings more than pretty much any other kind of meeting. So following this up between now and May, please let me know if you want to get coffee, chat over your application. You have any specific questions, you just want to hop on the phone, you need a Zoom meeting, anything like that. I'm your point person. You should all have my email address from the invites that I sent out. But yeah, please do reach out, and we can discuss any more questions one-on-one. But for today, I really appreciate you all being here and your time and your engagement with us. I'll have this recorded and sent out and distributed to folks afterwards. But yeah, like I said, get in touch if anything else comes up. Otherwise, it's nice to see you all in Zoom land, and hope to cross paths soon. Thanks so much for attending today, and I'll let you go 7 minutes early. Lucky everybody on a Monday.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.